Hey, friends and family. Well, I think the time has come for you all to hear some excerpts from my upcoming book, The Calling of Cusps. Now, be warned, this material is from my manuscript, thus, it has yet to be professionally edited. When my Kickstarter campaign has been fully funded, I will pay for the final publishing services that this telling deserves. But in the meantime, please enjoy this rough and woild glimpse into The Calling of Cusps. Thank you. Hello, friends and family. IB here. Well, where I left you last time was with a brief introduction through the voice of the author of this book, IB Dirdenfey. And now I'd like to carry you on into the woild. I left you by saying, welcome to the woild. I left you by saying, we're going to experience a little telling together. This is the prologue to my book, The Calling of Cusps. It is the very beginning of a much longer story that I hope carries over for many, many books. We will see. So, let's begin. Prologue. A little telling. Caasizah was dreaming of the owl. She flew in its presence. She flew through its eye. She was with and without it as they spun through the sky. The lights changed about them as bright colors from Ra. Caasizah worshipped and wept at the wonders she saw. The sun watched, and it waited to be filled by the all. The owl was hoo-hooing as it laughed out its call. That mirthless man's music, that dreg-garbled slew, that melody of madness with each breath it drew. It showed her some records that few ones had seen, that troubled her temper with visions obscene. You have to be careful, came a voice from afar. The owl spoke to it, only fools fear a scar. Then Caasizah's great eyes fluttered. She stirred from her slumber upon stump. She brought forth her great gaze from its woildness days, kindling life in her dream-stupid slump. Caasizah lifted her great chin. It had drooped to her great chest as she'd slept. She looked around from the center of the temple sanctum where she lay. She shifted her cup, undraping it from the surface of the large, moss-covered stump. She rolled to the ground, kneeling and turning back to her mossy bed. A cockroach stood atop it, twitching its antenna at her. She smiled. Then she heard someone humming. She looked around, over the bushes and between the 8 tidings trees that encircled her, and saw her father approaching. He gave her a great grin and called, "Little bear, how was your rest?" She yawned a great yawn, and her father laughed. She replied, "Not restful. I dreamed of the owl." Her father passed between a willow and a rowan tree and entered the sanctum. The owl, he mused. Well, what did he want? Caasizah shrugged and suggested, "To show me something?" He nodded and supplied, "Or lead you astray." Caasizah chuckled. Her father sniffed at a patch of white clover growing near the rotten root of the stump. She was glad to see him, but none the less surprised at his sudden appearance. She asked, "Where have you come from?" Without looking up from his floral inspection, he answered, "I have come from far away." She asked, "Well, I left you no signs. How did you find me?" She wondered about his knack for finding her in the strangest places, and a little voice within her said, "He's hiding something from you, a powerful knowing, and leaving you ignorant. Perhaps it amuses him." "Signs," muttered her father. "Signs are always here, placed to mark our way, long before we pass them. I merely followed the signs that were left for you to follow." He bit off one of the clover blossoms and began to chew. He then turned his great head and smiled at her. He was greater than her, and beginning to look old. He continued, I have been wandering the halls of the wilderness, and learning of the woild as I go. The tides have heralded a great change as this new age of Valence arises, and my bearing changes with it. He scratched at his great ear, watching her for a sign of response. Caasizah nodded, then admitted, the enemy grows in power. The war is almost over. Her father finished scratching, then inspected his great claw and wondered aloud, Says who? She snorted and mocked, Who? He flicked something from his great claw and sighed. The tone of his next words suggested a tired feeling of obligation to repeat long unheeded counsel. Be careful with him, love. He's not right. He means well, but... I know, father, Caasizah cut in. He's dangerous. And dreg-headed. She paused, wondering if she should be more afraid. And a voice within her said, Why fear the inevitable? He will destroy you. She said aloud, I know who he is. Trust me. After a moment's hesitation, he yielded. Always, his great deep voice rumbled, and his great chin bowed in acknowledgement. There was silence between them as their great eyes told simple tellings. Then her father spoke. I'm going home now. But I had to find you first. He bit his great lip for an instant. His great eyes darted away. Then he explained, Something special to tell you. He reached out for her great paw. She clasped his and smiled up at him. She loved him. She trusted the one behind that great white face more than any other. Then the young one in her shimmied to the surface. Caasizah's smile slunk sideways towards a smirk, and she asked, Who telled you the telling you bring? Whose telling is it? Who, father? Who? He reflected. Who? 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 She had known he would play along with her little game. He always did. Who? She jeered with good humor. She caught his eye as they both stilled. With tense cups, they held great paws, twitching, teasing tugs as their breaths ticked by. Caasizah pulled first, but her father was stronger. Her great tug was twisted aside by his tactful turn of great hips. She spun, staggered by his strength, and he caught her in a great bear hug. Laughing, and after headbutting his great chest, Caasizah sagged into his great embrace. He was warm, and his cup churned with his own great chortles. The wilderness loved loving laughter. The tidings trees encircling them glistened with the colors of each Leah's light. Muotham's red willow, Gormgigon's orange rowan, Lo'olesh's yellow cedar, Wakashayap's green maple, Kathithi's brown oak, Hanut Khan's blue ash, Blesthelia's purple apple, the indigo pine of Shogos. The white patch of clover stirred as a wave of wilderness wind whirled about them. The cockroach upon the stump spluttered into anxious flight, hurrying out of the sanctum, and disappeared beyond the edge of sight. Caasizah felt her maker then. He wrapped his all-powerful arms around her and her father, as he always does when two of his children share his love. Then Caasizah's own father whispered down to her ear, He loves you, Caasizah. It's true. Artus-Rah watches us, all the way through. He leaves you his signs, so you'll know what to do. Your caasizah, the marcher, each great cup you've been through, from the rim to the towers, all over you flew, All eons of the woild were your home as you grew, protected from dregs by the lines that I drew. Grown you are now, and not mine to tend, though your old man can be troubled to patch and to mend. If aid you are needing, a hand I will lend. If blood you are pouring, my life I will spend. But you are a hero. Your way will not end, for he guides you, my child, his vassal to send. Artus-Rah be your maker, your chieftain, your friend. Your breath will be his, from beginning to end. Holding each other, they stood within the ring of tidings trees, appreciating the solitude and shimmering light of the temple's inner sanctum. The wilderness tide ebbed and flowed with the breath of the trees. Then Caasizah heard something from far away. Beyond the sanctum's walls and its undulating, permeable haze of wilderness waves that swelled and sprayed from the sanctum's wilderness stump door, beyond the outer walls, where Artus-Rah's temple Liand met with the encircling gift garden of Lo'olesh. From within that garden, pooling in the hinterlands of Lo'olesh's great cup, came the faint whisper of a Liga tribe ones singing. They sang to Artus-Rah, and perhaps to herald the arrival of new ones. As if in confirmation of that thought, a bell clanged from the steepled peak that kept watch from the temple's highest vantage. Caasizah's father squeezed her and then loosened his great embrace. He let out a long, slow breath. They stood and they breathed from the breath of the trees, as a cool, tidy wind came and swept up some leaves. All voices were whispers of plant hosts, save one. A bebe from the stump had started to hum. Deep and low and ever so slow, it hummed out the tune of feeling moss grow. Caasizah's father had heard it, so he hopped on the stump. The bebe went quiet in response to the thump. Forgive me, little friend, for that little jump. The bebe hummed once, like sedge in a clump, and appeared from the rot like a yellowish lump. Is Lo'olesh your bearer? Her father asked with a grin. The bebe stood straight, made itself thin, and nodded front to back like a reed in the wind. You knew that, father, Caasizah chastised with mirth. You could see by its light and the place of its birth. She laughed, and he winked, and the bebe did hum, a tiny vibration of good woild fun. Well, bebe, her father said, have you remembered your name? Is your bearing for Artus-Rah one and the same? Or does pure stagnation still muddle your brain? Go ahead, little light, and put forth your claim. Caasizah thought that the bebe looked suddenly lame, and only just understood as it croaked the name, Jame. The bebe then sank and hummed high in shame, and wept like a puddle in a downpour of rain. Caasizah said, Oh, bebe, you suffer, and you are to blame, but the record of your sins has been put to the flame. Rejoice, he has saved you. You are no longer lame. Caasizah finished and turned to her father. The bebe wept as the two marchers began telling to each other again. Father? Yes, Caasizah? What about the telling you brought for me? Caasizah noticed that the bebe Jame was listening. It was still pulsing regular squelches of woe, but its sunken, squished face and dull, corncob yellow eyes were gazing at her father. It seemed to Caasizah that her father was savoring the moment. He sat down, cross-legged, and began humming the call of Lo'olesh to the bebe. The song was quiet and guttural, with slow notes of patient tone. The bebe twitched. Her father continued, while the muddy sobs reverberating from the stump-bound, mush-mouthed being diminished into a steady stretch of peace. Transfixed, and after rippling a gargly breath of relief, the bebe began humming Lo'olesh's call as well. With gentle, gargantuan grace, her father dismounted the stump and stooped to harvest a great handful of temple-floor duff. He then blanketed the bebe in a sprinkle of that woild mulch. The all was there in that mulch, as it was everywhere, expressed in the playful combat of the 10 great bearers of Artus-Rah. Caasizah knew them and saw them. She saw within that bebe shower the traits of the 10 Leahs, some more than others. The dander of Gorm-Gigon, the bones of Hanuk Khan, the clinging cells of Wakashayap's sweat, the fermenting fuel of Blesthelia's chyme, all there, all chosen, all making within the temple sanctum a poetic saga of filling, bearing, and pouring, infinite in complexity, singular in fealty, a multitude given then in generosity by some Leahs, and held as hidden vision by others, a singularity divided, and divided, and divided, and rejoined, and reformed, and reborn. The bebe's clay-paste hum roused her from her minding. A voice within her sneered, "You can't stand not hearing yourself think, can you?" Her father began again. "Caasizah, I found your mother." Caasizah started and jerked her great head to face him. She almost began asking, but her jolting motion was perceived by the bebe, who ceased his humming. Her father reprimanded her with a wry smile, then hummed the call of Lo'olesh again. He loosed the nozzle on his great cup and began sloshing his water around the bebe's rotten bed. It sighed like a farting frog and resumed its humming. Caasizah's father murmured to her, "Jame is almost home." Caasizah blurted out, "Where's mother?" He did not make her wait any longer. He answered as he tucked his great lever away, "She is stuck in the Valence." Caasizah closed her great eyes. She bowed her great head and said, "Praise be to Artus-Rah." She meant it, yet her gratitude was marred by the bitter sting of such a terrible telling. The Valence was a wrong, twisted place, hard and cruel. It made victims of those who breathed for the woild, and enemies of those who breathed for Artus-Rah. It was a battleground, the pure at its center, ever reaching from within, desecrating the natural orders of Leah, Liand, and Animate. Yet there were also deployed ones of the 10 tribes, the elect of Artus-Rah. They were the moving, feeling body of hope in the Valence. Their bearing was to save what could be brought back, and to survive what was forever fallen. Before letting her imagination take her, Caasizah asked, "Is mother a prisoner? A slave?" Her father half shook his great head, half shrugged. With surprise, she noticed an unfamiliar expression of pain there, skulking like shame behind a sort of sour grin. His marcher eyes seemed to be holding up a great weight, and they sweat shallow tears for their efforts. Yet Caasizah still saw that great joy in him, that he always bore, like a light that would never dim. If mother isn't enslaved, then how is she stuck? A crawling of buried, fear-scabbed memories fondled her inner eye. "The Valence is a discouraging place to be stuck in," her father said in a whisper to himself. "Father, your mother is a cusp, Caasizah. Your mother has abandoned her tribe. She has left her Leah. She's renounced her great bearing to Artus-Rah." His voice was almost angry. The bebe hummed the call louder. Her father breathed a long, great breath and exhaled, saying, Artus-Rah is my guide. I seek his wisdom and beseech him on your mother's behalf. Artus-Rah will have her in the end. I know that I cannot seek her, for my bearing is elsewhere. But yours, he seized Caasizah's great paw again and squeezed. Caasizah, you must go to her. Your bearing is with her. I have been with Shogos. Deep into the wilderness halls I flew. Artus-Rah showed me your path, at least some of it. Artus-Rah showed me how much he needs you, how much your mother needs you. I know now that you must find her, and with her, you will find the great pouring that your being bears for. Caasizah said nothing at first. She noticed that the bebe, still tucked beneath its detritus sheath, had dissolved into a lifeless thing. It had passed, and now resembled little more than a knobbish burl of rotten wood, hidden beneath dry yellow moss and a crumpling of tan leaves. Jame is going to be again, she said, and smiled. Her father smiled as well. He replied, so he will. Though, even if he recycles on the morrow sun, I expect he will still be a young one when the woild ends. She thought that was a strange thing for him to say. A voice within reminded, he can't help it if he's touched. Oh, father, Caasizah said. She sighed. You know the woild won't really end. His smile vanished. He said, I pray to Artus-Rah that it does. He looked to check the sky. It was green, though shifting from Wakashayap to Cathithi, as puffy clods of brown clouds and chestnut herds of speckled light migrated into the leafy celestial flood. He looked back at her and said, I will go now. Before departing, he gave Caasizah a soft hug and 10 gentle kisses on the crown of her great black-haired head. She returned the affection in similar marcher manner, laying her 10 kisses upon the snow-lit fur of his crown. Before disappearing, he left her with a final telling. As he stepped away through the wavering wilderness bushes and trembling temple trees, his cup halted. He twisted to face her. He called back, Your mother is with the court of the Valence Lords. They are on the move, as ever, waging a new war, serving a new self-proclaimed king. Your mother is enslaved by him, and will not be released for the sake of her own grace or goodwill. Follow the signs. The wilderness totems are your birthright, and you theirs. Valence-Lord is your great bearer, and you are a marcher. You have the might of Artus-Rah within you. I have complete faith in your bearing, Caasizah. Remember that. And remember that a wandering in the woild may be the surest path to Ra, especially when it's other ones that you wander for. I hope you make many friends on your deployment. He nodded, and his joy shone through. He said, I love you, little bear. His head spun back, and before Caasizah could call out, he shouted, When you have finished with your great reunion, you can all find me on the ice. And then he was gone. She was glad then. It had been seasons since she had seen him. Caasizah expected it would be a long while before she found him again. She knew she would. She smiled and whispered, Thank you, Artus-Rah. Welcome to the Woild. We're in it now. We're in it together. I don't know if you could tell, but when I read this, I actually get emotional. This book is woven into the story of my my struggles and some of my bouts with, difficult things in life. And in a way, this book has given me a lot to appreciate about the world, but more so than about the world, about what we as humans have as a gift in God, and what we as humans have as a gift, that we are here and we are struggling through this life and this world that is falling apart, but there is a light somewhere. Love you all, friends.